The new plugin from Plugin Alliance emulates the SPL PQ Mastering Equalizer. But how does it shape up? Hi, welcome to the Crates Motel. My name's Conan. In today's video, we're going to be looking at Plugin Alliance's new emulation of the SPL PQ Mastering Equalizer. Now, if you watch my videos, you will know that I don't really go in for the whole science thing. I don't use Plugin Doctor. I don't really compare hardware and software. But in this case, I have used the PQ quite a lot. So I might make some comparisons. They'll be from memory and they'll be subjective. Let's jump in. So here we are in Studio One. As you can see, this is a monster and Plugin Alliance have nailed the look of it. I mean, it looks exactly like the hardware. You can change the GUI here, which is great. You can't do that on the hardware, and you can expand the extras down the bottom. Now, I just want to run through the plugin very, very quickly. As you can see, it's a mastering equalizer. So it has, stepped adjustments for cut and boost. You have 5 bands here. And here you pick the frequency, which is, slightly different for each band. And down here you have an adjustable Q. Now, the difference between this and, most equalizers is you can choose between constant Q, which is represented here with these numbers without the white background, and then proportional Q, which you hit this button here and you have this amazing blue light, and that's represented with the white background. If you want to learn more about constant and prop EQ, look it up online, but it's really handy having an EQ that you can switch between. I mean, I love that. I loved it on the hardware. Proportional EQ, API is a pretty famous one that most people would think of when they think of that. Like I said, really, really handy. Down the bottom, we have high pass, low pass, which is really useful. We have the PA TMT, where you can randomize the channel, change it yourself, or you can have it in digital mode, so there's no sound added, character added. Here we have switches for mid-side, channel link, auto listen, really useful. I love these lights, they just look incredible, just like the hardware. And we have the THD we can adjust here and turn on and off. Mono maker, stereo width, output, input, fairly standard stuff. Here we have something which we don't really need, I suppose, in the software world, but it's a nice touch that they've put this on there because this is actually on the hardware and it's an auto bypass. And what it's there for is when you have it in the studio, the actual hardware, and you're leaning in and out, adjusting things, you're going in and out of the sweet spot. So to switch it on and off, you're going in and out of the sweet spot rather. So with the auto bypass, you can switch it on and you can adjust this and it basically will switch it into bypass. Depending on how you've got this set, you can see underneath there it's 4.7 seconds, 3 seconds or whatever. So it does it automatically for you. Now, that's not such a necessary thing in software because it's easy enough for us to do that without leaving the sweet spot. A lot of us work on headphones, so again, not really that necessary. But I like it. I like the touch. It kind of feels more hands-on and it's a bit more tactile and it makes you feel like you're using the hardware, which, let's face it, when we use emulations, a lot of us like to feel at least a little bit like we're using the hardware. So that's why it's a nice touch. So let's get into how it actually sounds because that's what we're here for. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to run it with a couple of masters, make some mastering moves. Not going to explain it too much, but just really I want to show what you can do with the EQ. As I said, I am familiar with the hardware, so I'm going to make some moves that I did make on the hardware, and from memory, I might make a judgment on whether I think it sounds like the hardware or not, but that's not important. What I want to do is show what it can do. And then we're going to try out some individual channels because when somebody says to me mastering equalizer, I immediately think, okay, I want to try it out on something that isn't mastering because, a lot of the time it's about breaking the rules in the studio. It's about using things in a way that you wouldn't normally use them. And I like to do that on this channel. So we'll try it out on a few sources, maybe some individual drums, maybe a vocal, maybe some instruments, piano, something like that. So let's have a listen to it on a master first. One thing I didn't explain actually when I went through the plugin is up here you have this switch, which basically, when you have it turned off, you have 20 decibels of cut and boost. But when you have it switched on, it quarters that. So it's only 5 decibels. So it does actually, for mastering especially, it gives you a much more accurate hands-on, you know, kind of adjustment for boosting and cutting. So I have my default stored with quarter gain, to be honest with you, because I have tended to use this for mastering. I'm just going to turn that off for now. So let's listen to it on a master. I mean, that's such a smooth low end. Let's push things a little bit more than I normally would. I mean, I don't want to make that comparison, but it is how I remember the PQ. It's very subtle. Obviously, I've got it at quarter gain here, so don't really pay attention to these at all. SPL stuff tends to have a very kind of smooth, warm, rounded feel to it. The Pasek, which I use quite a lot on low end, the 50, around about 50 to 60 on that is just, for me, is one of my favorite in the box EQs, and the hardware was as well. Obviously with the hardware, I didn't just use it for low end, because, you know, you couldn't just, I don't want to say waste, but use an EQ just for low end like that. But in the box, I can have as many instances as I like, and this is very, very similar to the Pasek in terms of how the bottom end sounds. It's very rounded, it's very smooth, very silky. When I use a mastering EQ for an overall sound, I do like a little bit of character added sometimes, but I don't want it to change the vibe or the sound of the client's track, because, you know, it's not my job really to do that unless they specifically ask me to. But what I love about EQs like this, and what I love about what this is doing, is it is imprinting a kind of the typical SPL sound, but it isn't changing it so much that it changes it. Does that make sense? Doesn't really. It just kind of, the best way I can think of describing it is it's put a sheen across the track. And when I use a mastering equalizer, I want to be able to click it in, and I've made the adjustments that I want to make, and it does exactly what I want it to do. What I'm trying to say is, let's say, for instance, I didn't even listen to the track. I quickly listened to the track. I made my assessments, wrote them down. Needs a little bit more bass, needs a bit of mud cut out, needs some clarity at 5K, that kind of thing. Standard, you know, mastering things that you go through. And I would take an equalizer like this, and I would set up in my mind, before actually even playing the music through it, and I would have in my mind where I want it to end up and how I want it to sound. And this EQ, the hardware of it, and I have to say the software of it, is doing that for me. I think I could have made these moves on a pre-assessment of this track, and then when I played it, it did exactly what I wanted it to do. It's really rounded up the bottom end in a really subtle way. I mean, this was a really, really good mix from the client to start with. It doesn't really need a lot, to be honest. But the client did want me to push the bottom end a little bit. And I wish I had this EQ when I did the actual master. I can't remember what EQ I did use, but probably the Soma, maybe something like that. And so what I'm saying is, losing my train of thought, is having an EQ where I can make an assessment in mastering and then make the adjustments without even playing the music. And then click it in and it does what you want it to do. That's really, really handy for a workflow. And obviously it speeds things up as well, because, you know, I don't always have 2 or 3 hours per track. You know, sometimes you might spend 15 minutes on a master, half an hour on a master, you know, maximum, and you're going through an album. You want to have a workflow. You want to have an EQ that you know the sound of, that you know what it's going to do. Very, very quickly you can dial in what you want, and then you can make minor adjustments. So I probably would have set this up pretty much like this after making the assessment on this track. And it's done exactly what I wanted it to do. You know, it's given some really nice, clean, posh sheen on the high end. I've put a bit of clarity around about 5K, which is what I wanted. I felt that it needed something around about 700, so I went for 735. These are all pretty standard constant Qs I've used, really. I haven't really gone anything crazy, just maybe here. And, you know, and just boost the low end, round the low end up a little bit, which is why I've gone quite low at 52. And then I've used the high pass filter a little bit. Now, I'm not exactly sure what the curve is on the high pass filter, to be honest with you. I probably should check the manual, but using the curve of the high pass and then boosting around about 50K tightens things up, and it gives it a, you know, a nice rounded kind of sound to it, kind of a little bit Pole-Tech-y, I guess. Just I'm rambling now, because honestly I am going to rave about this EQ because it's really, really good, and I love it on masters. So let's have a listen on another master. This time what we're going to do is we're going to use it in mid-side. Reason is, on this particular master, when I did it for the client, I wanted to open things up a little bit. It needed a bit of width, and I didn't really want to use a stereo width on it at all, or any imaging plugins. So I just used the old trick of opening up the highs a little bit. So let's have a listen on this EQ and see what it can do. Yeah, so I can hear that what that's done is subtle again, is when it goes into bypass, you'll hear the track kind of close in on itself a little bit, and then just turning it back on again, it blossoms and opens up a little bit. Again, very, very subtle, but it does exactly what I want it to do, what I remember the hardware doing, and it has that, again, that nice sheen on the high end. I might actually just push that up a little bit down here. Let's have a listen. Don't forget to unlink. Concentrate on what the hi-hats are doing. That's when you'll hear, that's where you'll hear it spread out. So yeah, really nice and subtle. So let's have a listen to it on a piano piece. So it's not specifically a master, it's just piano playing, and I want to just clean it up a little bit, but still make it sound very natural sounding. I don't want it to sound EQ'd. So very, very subtle there again, but it's taken this frequency round about here. I felt was a little bit muddy, was a little bit boxy. You can hear it if you click on it and using the auto listen. So this is just, let me just take that a little bit wider. And it gives it a bit more clarity as well, I think, just by taking that out, rather than, you know, pushing too much. Well, I have actually put that up quite high, but, you know, it's taken away that boxiness, but it's done it in a nice natural way, rather than it sounding like you've grabbed hold of an EQ and you've, you know, taken those frequencies out, which is what you want with an EQ like this. It's not surgical, it's more broad stroke. So the last thing I wanted to show is if you open it on a mono channel, you instantly get this super cute mono version of the PQ, which just looks really, really cool. Let's change it to that. Yeah, I love it. That looks really cool. I'm just going to use it on a kick drum because specifically I love SPL equalizers in the low end. So I want to hear what it sounds like on an acoustic kick, where, you know, it needs a little bit more EQ work than, say, a kick that's a sample kick or a drum machine kick. You know, a lot of the sample pack kick drums you get will have already been EQ'd and compressed. So this is an acoustic kick in a room. It's pretty clean. Obviously, I'm not going to be using any compression on it or anything. I'm just going to be EQing it. Let's just see. I want to get a feel for how the low end sounds on this EQ on individual sounds. That's got a really, really nice sound to it. Let's really bring out the click. So that does not exactly the same, but very similar to what the Pasek does in the low end. I know this on the Pasek really well, around about 60, had it on about 66, didn't I? It's very girthy and gives it a real rounded edge. Rounded edge, that doesn't really sound right, does it? A roundness to it, that's a better way of saying it, I think. So again, It's very subtle. It's a mastering equalizer. I've got it on quarter gain. I could really push it to listen to what the low end sounds. In fact, just for fun, let's try it. Let me take that back a bit. I mean, you can get a really nice natural sounding thump there. That to me doesn't sound like it's EQ'd. It sounds very natural and doesn't sound flappy. Still sounds quite tight. Yeah, really nice. So there you have it, Plugin Alliance's emulation of the SPL PQ. I think you probably got the impression that I loved it. Absolutely do. I really think they've nailed it on this one. Obviously, the GUI looks amazing, but it's not really about how it looks. But let's be honest, we do like a nice looking GUI. The sound is very much how I remember a hardware SPL PQ being, but I don't have one to compare it to. But I did use it a lot. And it, when I make the moves that I used to make in mastering using that hardware EQ, I did the same thing in the box and it had the same result that I remember. It's very subtle, has a lovely warm sheen that it imprints on the sound. I don't really know how I can explain this without sounding a bit stupid, but because you can't imprint a sound or a character on something but still sound transparent. There's a few EQs that Neve do which does the same thing for me, and it does keep an air of transparency where it doesn't sound like EQ, but it does also imprint a sound and character to the source, to the master, to the individual track. So that would be the best way I could think of describing it. It does imprint a character and a sound to the source, but it doesn't sound like an EQ. I'm not talking about digital or analog here, because I'm just talking about EQ. I'm not saying it, a digital sound to it makes it sound, all edgy and anything like that. I'm just saying that EQs often make things sound EQ'd. And with this, it's very broad stroke, which is why it's great for mastering. But don't think of it just as a mastering EQ. You can use it on buses, you can use it on individual instruments. I know I didn't really show a whole lot there, piano and a kick drum and a couple of masters. I could have sat here all day and shown you guitars, vocals. It's really nice on vocals, especially female vocals that are a little bit harsh. It kind of has a almost de-essing effect on it, or a warm, kind of brings a warm vintage tube mic character to it. So try it out on vocals for sure, definitely. And yeah, don't just think of it as a mastering EQ. But I know that PA did send me this plugin. I do have an NFR license, but my opinions are my own opinions. And if I don't like something, then I'll say I don't like it. And I was perfectly entitled to release a video saying I didn't like this plugin, but I do like this plugin, and it's, for the foreseeable future, it's going to be a mainstay on my mastering, jobs, 100%. Not sure I'll use it a whole lot in mixes I do for clients, maybe on some buses as it's very broad stroke, maybe on some low end stuff, live bass, synth bass, that kind of thing. Very similar to how I use the Pasek, to be honest, in mixes. I love the fact that you can have mono instances of it, and obviously in the box you can have multiple instances of it, which is great. But for me, it is a mastering EQ, although break the rules and don't just use it for that. But I will definitely be using it in mastering for the foreseeable future. It's a beauty. It really, really is. I mean, I really think Plugin Alliance have nailed this one. And since I went in the box, it was a piece of hardware which I did miss. I have maybe 5 pieces of hardware which I really miss since being in the box, and that was kind of the last one to tick the box on, to have a decent emulation of the PQ for me to use for mastering. So thanks for watching. Please subscribe for more mixing and mastering tutorials and reviews. This is the Crates Motel. My name's Conan. Till next time.